YOLO Composing Gloves here, and today we are going to be taking a look at Fission by Eventide. This plugin allows us to separate and process transient parts of a sound from tonal parts of a sound. Here are a couple of examples. Fission looks at the source and uses frequency and time domain information to determine if a part of a sound is transient or tonal. If you're new, a transient is just an audio peak. Transient literally means a moment of excitement, like something was transient. It happened for just a moment. This means we are looking to be able to remove the spikes in our sound or the peaks in our sound. This is incredibly important for things like drums, where our perception of the drum is largely dependent on the transient. That generally gives us the punch of the drum. Fission allows us to take the transient part of a drum and process it separately from the tonal part of the drum. And this allows us to easily retune a drum and keep it sounding natural. A common problem is how to deal with the transient when tuning the drum. A lot of people will just chop the first bit of the drum off and process the rest of the sample as just a separate part. Another great use of Fission is to remove the strum sound from a guitar. Since the strum sound is largely transient, this is not a difficult task. And as you can see, great mix control can be obtained by this method. We can use this on all kinds of sources and get really specific results, or we can be very creative with it. Now, you could set up something very similar to this with just any old transient shaper. Just route your audio into two mixer channels and put a transient shaper on each. In one, remove the transient, and in the other, remove the sustain. You will wind up with something very similar. So why use Fission? Well, transient shapers are in general not made to purposely break a sound up into transient and tonal pieces so that when we put them back together, they're that original sound. Usually we look at them as just processing one sound through one shaper. This doesn't mean that we can't use transient shapers to get amazing results. This just means that they weren't made with that purpose in mind. Fission, however, was made with this in mind, and so the algorithm they have to decide what's transient and what's not is a little more tailored to this purpose. Another reason to use Fission is convenience. Fission will do all the routing for us, so we don't need to split our signal anymore. And it's great because we can now put this in the middle of a signal chain, and it's far simpler to deal with instead of doing this summation back into another channel and then run it through another chain if we wanted to do something else with it. This also means that in mixing, bussing will be substantially simpler. On top of that, if you want to change the balance within Fission, it's really simple because all the controls are right in front of you in one menu, versus going to the mixer and having doubles of every control can be a bit confusing. In general, Fission is very easy to use and understand. You put a sound in and it splits it up. After you split that sound, you can pass each part, the tonal and the transient, through a single effect. Unfortunately, larger signal chains are not possible internally. However, you can split the signal into two mixer channels like we did previously and load Fission on both. Then on each Fission, simply solo the transient or the tonal, whichever one it's supposed to be, and then you can do all the effect processing to your heart's content. This is usually only needed in cases where you are doing extensive sound design, though I personally would love the ability to have larger internal signal chains. You have the ability to change the algorithm via the source slider to better suit your material. While they have specific names for the input material, don't let that stop you from changing the source setting to drums even though you're putting strings in. You may obtain a really cool result. The transient decay knob allows you to adjust the length of the time considered for transients. The smoothing knob acts like an automatic volume ramp control. The focus slider changes how Fission sees the audio. If you increase the focus to one side, you will find that transient and tonal parts begin to meld together on the side you've changed the focus to. This is great because now you can have most of the transient and some of the tonal part going through one process, with less of the transient going through another. This way you can achieve a really interesting sense of wet-dry. The effects on the top and bottom are different for tonal versus transient. These are all your standard effects with your standard controls. So I'm not going to explain these in this video. Rather, I'm going to show you some examples of interesting ways you can apply these effects. If you're rusty on a particular effect, check out my Sound and Synth Basics course. Fission is rather expensive at a price of $179 currently. It's also included in the Eventide Anthology bundle, which, as the case with most bundles, is usually the best way to buy. I want to make it clear that I'm not sponsored by Eventide and that I'm sharing it with you just because I actually find myself using it a lot more than I thought I would. Despite its simple idea and the fact that you can only use one effect, it's been excellent for getting useful creative results that actually sound great pretty quickly. It's really easy for plugins to generate all kinds of interesting results that just aren't that useful. I find this process to be one that I use a lot. I'm constantly tossing transient shapers on things, And usually I'm doing it just to adjust the tonal balance, or the tuning example that was given earlier is another one that is just insanely useful. So I'm just sharing this with you because I've just been very impressed by this plugin. If you make something dope with Fission, be sure to comment it down below, and have a blessed day.